You are looking into a campaign about military housing. What's the idea?
Well, the basic premise is that everyone who serves in our armed forces should be living in a decent quality home. But we know that armed forces personnel and their families are living on military bases and in the community in military housing that is leaky, with leaky roofs, broken boilers and black mould in bedrooms. Now, this problem has been getting worse over recent years, with private contractors hired by the Ministry of Defence paid a fortune but not repairing these properties. And that is leading directly to people feeling that they want to leave the services. But at this very moment, we need a stronger set of armed forces. And with 1 in 4 armed forces personnel saying that poor accommodation is increasing their intention to leave the armed forces, that's a really serious problem that we need to get to grips with. And what Labour's been saying is the 13 years of Tory government have not got to grips with it, but the next Labour government will make this a priority so we can fix it, so every one of our armed forces and their families gets to live in a decent quality accommodation.
Military accommodation is obviously in the news today as well, because the government is talking about potentially housing migrants in disused military sites. Do you think that's a good policy?
Well, I don't think it's going to work because fundamentally it doesn't fix the problems with our immigration system.
I didn't ask you if it was going to work, but in principle, do you think it's a good policy? If it's good enough for soldiers, is it good enough for people who come to our shores trying to claim asylum?
Well, they're not being used for the military at the moment, so they're not moving soldiers or RAF personnel out of the barrack blocks and moving asylum seekers in. In many cases, these are bases that have been closed for many years and might have been used for different purposes in the meantime. But it doesn't deal with the fundamental problem in the fact that the asylum system's broken. It takes too long for decisions to be made. In fact, actually, we know the number of decisions about asylum cases is actually falling with a really slow response rate. So that means that we're not able to either grant asylum for those people who have an eligible case fast enough, or, importantly, remove those people who don't have an eligible case because we haven't got return agreements with our nearest neighbours, France and the rest of the European Union, and the government's not being tough enough on those criminal gangs. So it's dealing with the consequences of a broken policy rather than trying to fix it at source, which they really should be. I'm
just trying to get my head around whether you disagree with the government's policy in principle or if you just think the implementation is wrong. So it's the speed at which the asylum system is working, or whether or not it's about whether you can get a returns agreement in place with countries around the world and our nearest neighbours as well. Or is it in principle, do you think that, look, we should be more welcoming towards asylum seekers, we should be letting more people in? Which is it?
Well, at the moment, we have too many asylum seekers and not enough accommodation for them. So there has to be a way of housing people that are coming to the UK and claiming asylum. But the fundamental problem is, wherever you put them, if you're not having an immigration system that can make decisions sensibly, and last year they made a decision on only 1% of asylum cases. So this isn't about a marginal gain here and there. This is about a fundamental failure of the government to make proper decisions on asylum cases. And no matter how much tweaking around the edge and dealing with the consequences of a broken system, if you don't get to the root causes, that's the criminal gangs that are profiting from those dangerous crossings across the Channel, and the fact that the government can't make quick enough decisions to have a system that works. So what Labour's arguing is that we should be fast-tracking those people that are claiming asylum from safe countries, Albania, for instance. By fast-tracking those decisions, you could be clearing much of the asylum backlog, so you can actually then be spending the time on those cases that do deserve proper scrutiny and proper support for those individuals that are fleeing war and conflict. That's not where we are at the moment. So this looks to me like just another headline-grabbing initiative, which is there to divert attention from the fact that the system is fundamentally failing.
Where do you think people should be housed then?
Well, they shouldn't be housed in hotels because that is far too expensive for the public. It doesn't provide the support and certainty for the people who have fled war and famine. And so, realistically, we can have an argument about where the huge numbers of people should be housed now, and there is probably a case for looking at different varieties. I'm not convinced putting people on a barge is the right answer.
So not hotels, not barges. What's the idea then? Where should they go?
Well, the way to deal with that is by dealing with the backlog, is by processing the claims.
They've got to go somewhere in the meantime, though, haven't they?
Well, in the meantime, they are going into hotels. We know from the government announcement yesterday that those people who served with our armed forces in Afghanistan, who have been given sanctuary in the UK, who are in hotels currently are going to be evicted by the government in 3 months' time, but that's not the same policy they're applying to asylum seekers. So it seems that if you serve with our armed forces, you're getting a rougher deal from this government than if you came over on a small boat because the system's not working to process those claims. I mean, this is a mess, Sophie, and that's the fundamental problem on this. If we don't fix it at source, if we don't help keep more people in their countries by making safer arrangements, creating safe routes so people with a genuine case can legally come to the country and then have their claims processed not in many years, but in a small number of months, which is what we should be aiming for, well, that would clear up the backlog, that would reduce the impact on communities. And last night in the Commons, Labour tabled amendments to the illegal immigration bill that would have allowed local communities to have a bigger say on that extra temporary accommodation in their own communities. Now, Tory MPs voted against that, but now we have Tory MPs who are finding out today that their own communities are having additional asylum seeker accommodation placed on former military sites where their communities get no say. It doesn't seem that the system's working.
We spoke to Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, a little bit earlier on the programme. She was talking about the offer made to teachers. She thinks it's a reasonable one. She also said that people shouldn't worry, parents shouldn't worry about school funding because of the additional money that was given in the autumn statement. Is she right?
Well, I would like people not to worry about their kids' education because after the years of disruption, we know that our kids have suffered quite a lot. But the pressures that teachers are under, the cost of living crisis, it really means that teachers have a valid concern about where they are. And I think ministers need to sit down much more with them.
Well, they have been sitting down with them, haven't they? They haven't really got anywhere, right?
But to sit down, there's a simple act of sitting around a table and there's the act of sitting down and genuinely listening and trying to find a solution.
So
and
would Labour offer more money to teachers?
Well, I can't make spending commitments, especially this far out from a general election, but I think what the government could be doing is genuinely listening to the case and trying to find a solution here in the way that they haven't really been as enthused to do. Now, when ministers have sat down with unions in other sectors, for instance, if they genuinely listen, if they put away their hyperbole and their big stick and say, OK, let's have a mature conversation about how we can resolve this, because teachers and nurses are not the bad guys in this situation.
It's not just a mature conversation they want, though, is it? They want money, right? That's the sticking point. They have been sitting around the table. Both sides have got around the table and they just can't agree on money. That's a problem.
It is. And that's where good negotiations properly work, because in these situations, you resolve strike action by proper negotiation. And that's where ministers should be, around the table, taking the time to understand the true consequences, especially for those people in teaching who are on low salaries, those people starting out in teaching, for whom the cost of living crisis is acutely felt for them.
OK, now, this week, of course, Keir Starmer has waded into a bit of a row with Jeremy Corbyn. He's been barred from standing as a Labour candidate. I just want to read a quote to you. The attacks on Jeremy Corbyn on the election we just had were terrible, and they came back at us on the doors. They vilified him, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew why they were doing it. Jeremy Corbyn being vilified. I mean, it feels like that could be a quote from John McDonnell or Diane Abbott about Keir Starmer recently, but that was actually Starmer himself at the Labour leadership hustings back in 2020. I guess my question isn't, about rehashing the argument about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is fit to stand as a Labour MP. My question is about Keir Starmer, because it feels like he's changed his mind on Jeremy Corbyn, despite the fact that everything we knew about Jeremy Corbyn then, we know now.
Yeah, I think Keir's made the right decision here, because he's also given Jeremy the opportunity to apologise for his remarks around anti-Semitism that Jeremy chose not to, and a route back into the parliamentary party if he had taken it. Now, Jeremy Corbyn chose not to do that. I don't think Jeremy's the future of the Labour Party. I think we've moved on as a party, and Labour now looks unrecognisable from the party that Jeremy led a few years ago.
Do you think Keir Starmer looks unrecognisable as well, then? Because he was obviously around the shadow cabinet table telling everyone that they should vote for him as the next Prime Minister.
But what's happened since then is we've had the EHRC report that looked at anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that highlighted the utter failings of our party to deal with anti-Semitism. Keir said on day one of his leadership that that would be the yardstick to assess his leadership against. He would take serious action, and that's what he has done. Jeremy had a choice about how to respond to that, and I'm afraid he chose poorly and chose to continue some of those some of that language that has helped, that was designed to downplay anti-Semitism. Well, anti-Semitism should have no place in the Labour Party and no place in politics in general. And if you can't call out anti-Semitism clearly without qualifying it, then you shouldn't be a Labour MP. And that's what Keir's made very clear to all the parliamentary party, and that's what Labour's National Executive Committee have made clear for anyone wishing to stand as a Labour candidate at the next general election.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.